Welcome back to the final video of my Asteroids tutorial series in Unity, video 5.5, where we get the player to be destroyed by asteroids and then respawn the player until they run out of lives. Once they run out of lives, we're going to display a game over screen and either allow the player to restart the game or to quit. And so let's begin making it so that Asteroids actually has a little bit of a challenge to it. So that is going to actually take us back to the player's script. So that's going to be under player and player ship. So that's going to take us here. And we need to write some code in order for us to acknowledge that we've hit an asteroid and that we need to be destroyed and be respawned. So the first thing I want to add is a variable for me to attach a explosion prefab, because the player should probably have an explosion when they die. So we'll say public game object explosion up here at the top of the player ship script, which we haven't been in a little while. And then we're going to go, I usually like to add this towards the end. We're going to put it right after fixed update. And this is going to be where we detect that we've hit an asteroid. So we'll say void on trigger enter. Yes. And we're going to say collider other. So this is the auto completed one. And this method runs whenever we enter another collider. So we need to first detect to see what it is. So this would also be the method that if we wanted to go through and start putting power-ups in, that we would want to acknowledge hitting the power-up here. Because we either could give it a name or give it a tag, and from there we can figure out what kind of power-up it is. So let's see if the power-up that we're going to hit is actually just an asteroid. So other.gameObject.tag.equals. If that tag is equal to asteroid, then we need to go through the code to destroy the player. Now, if you were to add other enemies, you could decide to either add more tags or allow enemies that don't kill the player on collision. Maybe an enemy spaceship that just shoots at you doesn't kill you, but its bullets do. Not sure. So let's go through and instantiate an explosion. So we'll instantiate the explosion at the player's current position, transform.position and transform.rotation. And then we will destroy the player. Now we do need to go through and actually get the player to respawn, but we're going to do that in a second. Let's just make sure that this works. And I guess while we're here, I do want to do what I did for the asteroids, and that is link in this manager object. So I want to use this private level manager, and I'm going to put that in player ship too, right under explosion, just so we can keep track of the game manager in case I need to reference something to it. And so much like asteroid small, let's go find it as well. So I'm going to copy this line out of asteroid small, which was from the asteroid small start method, going back over to the player, and I'm going to attach it inside of the player start method. And so we're just copying and pasting that out of the small asteroid. So we're going to find the game controller and just attach it to this manager variable, because this manager variable is going to also be what respawns us. More importantly, it's also going to be what tracks my last position and last rotation if needed. So let's go back to Unity. Now we will know that this isn't ready to go yet because we have not attached an explosion onto my player prefab. So let's go into my prefab subfolder, and I want to take a look at the explosion subfolder. We've already worked on the asteroid one. If you recall, we added an audio source that played on awake, and we added the spark cleanup script. So we're going to kind of want to do the same thing for the player, this explosion player. And let's do that by showing you a kind of neat thing you can do. You can actually duplicate a component. If you go to the triple dots over here, click on the triple dots, you can see there's an option here for copy components. We can choose to copy that component. We can go over to the prefab for the explosion player. And then if you choose any of these drop downs, it can be from the particle system. Everything's going to have a transform, so you can always choose the transform. And then click the triple dots, and you should see there's there's an option here called paste component as new. And it will add that component as a new component here. It actually pulls in the same settings. So, notice the volume was already set down to 0.4 here. And I want to switch this explosion sound effect to be the explosion player. So I've changed that. One thing to note, though, is once you've copied something, you can also paste as values. So it will just update these, these settings with the values from there. So that's a useful thing to know. So we've got the explosion player set at volume 0.4, and nothing else has changed. Pitch is still 1, so there's no crazy pitching up or pitching down. And then we do need that cleanup script. So I'm going to go back over to Explosion Asteroid and pick up this cleanup script. So I'm going to copy component, go back to Asteroid Player, and I'm going to paste the component as new. And you can see it's loaded that script there to delete this after 2 seconds. So let's hit play. Oh, I don't think we attached that to the player. So like if I were to fly into this asteroid, you see that I end up getting this error down here in the console, unassigned reference exception. And notice the script canceled. It didn't even finish deleting me from the world. So we need to go to the player prefab. And I usually like to do this inside of the prefab editor to make sure that it's actually changing the prefab. So if I double click this player prefab, you can see it loads it here. And then we want to, inside of this explosion field, attach explosion player. And now we can exit out of the prefab editor by clicking over here on this back arrow in the hierarchy, and the player should be updated. And so that means when I hit play, when I hit an asteroid, it's going to explode. Well, let's go find one towards the center of the screen. And so I blew up, and that's it. Player is dead. Now, I didn't respawn yet, and that's something I definitely want to start adding. So that gets the player to be defeated. But in order for us to respawn, we're going to need to add a method right after I'm destroyed that tells the game, the level manager, to respawn me. So let's start setting some of that stuff up inside of Level Manager and get that going. Now that we've returned to Level Manager, I do want to fix something from the previous video, which is the changing the color of some text. Because we're going to do that in this video. And I had trouble with it last video because I actually forgot that instead of using integer values, I should have just moused over it and looked. It uses floats, meaning it wants them as a proportion of 1. So I actually need these, instead of 255, just divide them by 255 like that. So I'm converting them to floats so that they use integer math. Because you're supposed to do them as a ratio of 1. That would actually fix that problem. But we will be changing the text of some labels, so we will see this again elsewhere inside of this code. But this will fix the timer. I'm not going to test this specifically because I know this will fix it, but we will encounter this a little bit later. But our original goal here was to come and then put a spawn player method. But I also want to store something here that's going to be kind of useful. And let's put that under, I guess we'll put it under game stats. We'll make a private variable that's a quaternion called last player rotation. Now, the reason I'm using this is because I do find it whenever I'm playing Asteroids to be rather jarring if I always get set back to facing north. I like to be facing the last direction I was facing. So we're going to use this variable as a way to set what the player was, which way the player was facing when they died. I could have made it a public variable, but I didn't want to because I don't want it to be visible in the game editor. So I'm going to have to make a custom method here called public void set player rotation, or let's call it set last player rotation, and it will take in a quaternion called old rotation, and we're going to set last player rotation equal to old rotation. So we're going to keep track of the last player's rotation that way. That way when we respawn the player, we know what direction to respawn the player in. And let's just call this respawn the player. Respawn player. So public void spawn player. And tentatively taking no parameters because there isn't really many parameters to have to send in. So the spawn player method can be pretty straightforward. We actually need to check to see how many lives we have left. So we'll say if lives is greater than 0, then we are going to go through the act of spawning the player. What we first want to do is check for any asteroids in position 0, 0, 0, because we want to move any asteroids out of the player's spawn location. So we're going to do the same command we've done many times. We're going to get a collider array called things using the physics overlap sphere. Oh, that feeling when you fail the autocomplete. In this overlap sphere, we're going to do it at position 0, 0, 0, so new vector 3, 0, 0, 0. And let's make it kind of big. Let's go with a size 4. That's actually quite large. It's going to have a radius 4 of kicking things out of that spawn location. So we'll use a for each loop to navigate each thing inside of this list for each collider called item inside of things. So we're going through looking to see what's inside of here. Now, you might want to consider if you have enemies that shoot at the player, you might want to also remove any sort of like enemy projectiles, or just delete any enemy projectiles. But we'll do move asteroids. We're going to do that first. If the item.gameObject.tag.equals asteroid. So if the thing in question is an asteroid, we need to move it. So we can then reference the item.gameObject.transform.position, and we're going to use our method back here that we did, the getRandomPosition, to find a new home for it. Unfortunately, we do have to pass in this string array of tags in a clear radius, so that's kind of annoying. And so I'm going to go look at my spawn asteroid method here, my spawn object method. And I remember that got kind of crazy. So let's just pull this bad tags thing. I'm going to copy that. I still don't feel like having to write that again. So I've returned to the spawn player method. And I need my string list of bad tags. So I guess there's no player to really worry about, but we'll leave it in the list. So we need a new position and we will use the boundary dot get random position. We'll push it back a little bit further. We'll do like a 0.4, so it is 40% close to the edge. Setting it in the bad tags as usual. And we'll demand a clear radius of something kind of large, like 1.2. We don't want to have to make something separate for big asteroids and small asteroids, because it shouldn't push a whole lot of asteroids out. But it'll push some of them out, and then we'll set this game object's position equal to this new position. So it's going to move each asteroid out of the way so that the player has a clear radius of 4 that they can spawn into. Additionally, so if you choose to add anything else, you might do that here, but we don't have any. Something to consider is that if you have anything else like enemy lasers, you might want to delete them out of this circle. So that should push any asteroids out of the way. And after we've moved all the asteroids, now we're clear to spawn the player. So we can say instantiate player, which is one of those prefabs, and we'll have to make sure it's attached, at new vector 3, so the start location, the dead center of the screen. And we could choose to use something like quaternion.identity, but we do have this variable called last player rotation, which is where the player was last. Now, last player rotation here might be blank, so we should kind of maybe be careful if last player rotation is null. We'll set it equal to the identity quaternion. Just in case anything weird happens to it, like if the player's rotation just got destroyed for some reason, we, rather than trying to use a null value here, which will crash, we just assume it to be the default so that we're safe in case of anything weird happening. All right, and so at that point, this player should have been respawned, and let's run this change lives method, and we'll change lives by -1. I'm not doing lives minus because I actually also built this change lives method to update the score as well. Well, update the label. So I don't want to just do lives minus. And so this should respawn the player. Now we will add an else case here. We'll do our game over stuff in a bit, but let's verify that this works, and then make sure that the player will respawn. So jumping back to player ship, we now need to update all this information. So I am going to use that manager dot set last player rotation to ship dot rotation, which I believe will be the same as if I just did transform dot rotation. Should produce the same result. Delete the player and spawn the explosion, and then respawn the player if possible. So manager dot spawn player, and spawn player checks to see if you have lives left as well. So it will respawn the player, and hopefully the player will be back in the game. Any asteroids in the dead center of the screen will get pushed away. So let's hit save, and let's see if this works. So I'm going to maybe just kind of chill in the center here. Hopefully this asteroid will come hit me soon. If not, I might just have to turn on debug mode and spawn a bunch of asteroids. But hopefully I can get hit by this asteroid, which is in the middle, which is great because it should get pushed out of the way. So you can see that that asteroid got pushed because it was too close to where the player was going to spawn. Once I run out of lives, that's it. There's nothing left. The timer's still going, So that means it'll continue spawning waves. So that's a choice if you want to disable this timer when the player is dead. But so that's getting the player to respawn. It is pushing asteroids out of the way if they're too close. Now that is a pretty small radius, but it did push it out. Which is important to know because it is actually saving the hit points of those asteroids. So if it had some damage on it, when it gets pushed away, it's still going to have that same damage on it. Okay, so that is successful. The player can get hit and get destroyed. Now let's add some code to kind of wrap it up, I guess. We want to be able to say that when you're out of lives, it's game over time. So that does mean I need actually a variable here for probably keeping track of game over. So private bool game over is false. And over here, when there are no lives left, we will set game over to true. And we need to do anything else that we would need here to indicate that the game is over. So that means I probably need one more text label. So let's go to canvas, or well, game object. UI text. Let's switch it to game view so we have a better view of what this thing looks like. I do want it actually at the center, so I'm going to go 0, 0, 0 on this. Height, maybe 60. Center it, so it's like kind of the dead center of the screen. We can increase the font size to 30, 40. Set them both to overflow. Maybe increase this size, but since it's on overflow, it really doesn't matter, honestly. And make it say game over. And we'll just call this status text. I'm gonna add a kind of an optional video at the end of this where we take this status text and make it do different things. Like we can have it say like wave complete. So we'll take a look at adding a few extra things with this rather than just being a purely game over text. Unfortunately, you can't really break up the size of the text inside of this, so if you really wanted to have some extra reminder text, you would have to make another label. But we can, again, explore that when I play around with the other labels in a sequel to this one. So it's some game over text that says game over, press enter to try again. Now, we don't want this kind of showing up on the screen constantly, so I'm going to disable it. And then we're going to make it enabled whenever it's time for it to show up on the screen. So going back to the game manager script, we need to add another variable to hold that script. So more UI links, public text. I think we're calling it status text. And again, we need to link it. Part of me is regretting my variable choices and pondering the consistency of my capitalization. But so we're going to find our status text, and we will enable it whenever it's game over time. So whenever it's game over, we're going to say status text dot enabled true. And so that should pop that text up on the screen, and it will already have its text loaded in there. You could choose to add some more to it if you wanted to, but that should be sufficient. Now let's add that, because it's kind of promising the ability to start over. So inside of update, let's consider putting some commands here to actually just restart stuff. And a few other things to consider as well is maybe it may be worth, when we're spawning these waves, now this is also kind of if there's no players in the world. We may want to also consider only spawn the next wave if game over is false. And I say that because you could run into the case of the player shoots at an asteroid, they die, the shot kills the asteroid, and it attempts to trigger the next wave. The player is dead, so there's no player left in the world, and you crash. So just something to consider. That's the only time the player is referenced, and I don't think we should be trying to spawn the next wave if we have lost. So something to think about. Anyway, let's add some code to restart the game. If, about to be a long series of if commands here. If input.getKeyDown is enter, or it's input.getKeyDown return. So kind of an old school computer thing, but enter key is actually the one that's on the numpad. The return key is actually the one that is in the center of your keyboard. So we first check to see, are you pressing either the numpad enter key or the big keyboard enter key, and it is game over. If that is the case, we will then reload the scene. So string current scene name equals scene manager. Oh, that's not highlighting. Hang on. So type in scene manager and then go to potential fixes. And we want to use using Unity scene management. And that will actually add this up here at the top, Unity engine.scene management. So if that auto fix didn't work, you need to add this yourself. All right, so scene manager dot get active scene dot name. And so if you rename the scene, it's actually currently called sample scene. I never even renamed it to game. Scene manager dot load scene, current scene name. So this will restart the scene. You can also use this to load other levels or load like a title screen or a credit screen. Let's also add one other thing, because unless you explicitly do this, it's not going to work. So get key down. If you push the escape key, we'll be kind of simple. We'll just quit. Application.quit. This has no impact on our test mode. So like whenever we're running this in play mode, this isn't going to do anything. This is only if you choose to compile your game, which could be something that will be explored in a bonus video. So right now we've got if the game is over and I push the enter key, it should do this. So we just need to go blow up into a few asteroids and see what happens. And then at this point, also thinking that I probably should include a game over as false here. So I'm including that on all these conditions. So you can't win the wave if it's game over, and you can't fail the wave if it's game over, and don't spawn a wave if it's game over, just to make sure there's nothing advancing progression-wise if you have lost. So we'll hit save, and let's go test this. So we've got some asteroids coming at me, get hit by that. Although I do have a null reference exception popping up on line 53. So I should probably go check that out. We're having an issue with the status text is actually having a problem. And that is likely due to the fact that if it's disabled here, it may not be likely to find it when it's actually doing its search. So that is an interesting issue that we're running into. So let's just attach it manually here and drag our status text like that. Because this is actually not finding it, because it's disabled. So it's not going to be found when it searches for it. So that kind of leads me to another thought, that we might be better off leaving it enabled and then immediately disabling it so that it hides immediately and it finds it correctly. The only concern is the fact that when you're building your game, you're staring at game over. So this should have like one more hit point on it because it got moved with the same hit points. And then boom, game over. Press enter to try again. And I can press enter and the game starts again. But I can't push enter now because, you know, the game's already started. And so that kind of looks like that's going to end up wrapping up our asteroids. So you know your player gets hit by these asteroids and your lives count goes down. And then once you have no more lives left, then the moment it tries to spawn the player is when you will lose. I'm actually holding out to see the text change color here on my wave timer. And I did mention that I wanted to do some color changing, but that's probably going to be in an optional video after this about some pop-up text for like if you beat the wave. So it'll say like wave cleared, and we'll look at cleaning up that you lose text. So this should change orange. And so that way it's kind of popping a little bit to the player. And if we fail to destroy these asteroids, we get more asteroids. And now the game is harder, we have more asteroids, and time will be pressuring us until we lose. I didn't import any other fonts. That would be another thing that is worth exploring in an optional video. It's not very difficult, but I think for the label video, we'll take a look at seeing some more fonts. But this does actually serve as the end of the Asteroids project. You have a functional Asteroids game at this point. And the player can be defeated. Let's actually take a look to see what this time does when we run out of time over here. And the player respawns. So it would be up to you if you want to try to put in some kind of like extra lives or other types of power-ups. We still have a few things that we could take a look at, such as invulnerability, better text for these, alternate weapons. So there's still more that you can do with this. But like in the game, our time is up. So, and it's not spawning the next wave. So we're good here. So that concludes our Asteroids tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a long adventure, but I think it was a good adventure. And as anybody who uploads anything on YouTube should say, if you enjoyed this, make sure to mash that like and subscribe button for more content like it. Thank you for watching.